Okay. So I'm curious on this because some of the things we've talked about, and you shared that one person who came up to you after hearing your talk, one of
Yeah.
the things she said was, this helps me say no. And I
Yeah.
think saying no is hard for a lot of people.
Oh,
It's
big
hard
time.
for a lot of people to say no to things. Um, I'm curious how you've seen helped people through that, because I understand. I learned at a very early age that saying no is one of the most powerful things. And sometimes it's a fear factor. It's almost
Yeah.
like, oh, but if I say no, the world's going to end. And then after you've said no and you go, hey, everything's fine, you realize, oh, I guess it's not that bad. But how have you helped people with that? Because I can see that being a legitimate concern for people where they're just like, I just don't know where to start. I mean, I just even think of the example where we started telling our families, we're not coming for holidays anymore.
Yep.
No, we're not. And it's
Yeah.
because of this, and nothing you say is going to change our mind. And it was not a popular decision. But when we did the value equation, it was like, yeah, but how do you help people get to that point?
There's two things I notice here. The first one is people find it easier to say no at home than they do at work, which is totally
Really?
understandable, because at work, it's your paycheck. You can't afford to lose your job. And there's this perception
Mm,
that you can't say no.
okay, I can see that.
So like there's that thing. Whereas your family, even though there could be some conflict, your job is not on the line when you're telling your family.
Yeah, they're still going to be there for you, even if you say
Right.
no.
So it's that perceived sort of sense of loss. So that's one interesting thing that I've noticed. But the other thing that's really helpful is when you say no, tell them why in a story. That's a really helpful way to do it. And so one of the things that we talk about in Productivity Gladiator training is like, if you have a to-do list, or my favorite, this just came up in my head the other day. I used to have a manager who had the list of all of the things that the team was doing, all the projects that we were responsible for as a whole team. And then when the big boss came in and said, hey, can you take on this and this? And hey, we've got these two things. Can you take the lead on that? He would turn to him, he would show them the whiteboard and say, well, which of these two things should drop off so that we can take on those two
So we
things?
can make space for that.
Because this is the bandwidth, right? And so for you as an individual, when you're telling your boss no, and like, you certainly need to be getting promoted often means you're saying yes. You're being willing to take on stuff. You're going to volunteer for things, and that's good. When you're at a capacity situation, if you just say no, I'm too busy, your boss is going to wonder why.
Might be a CLM.
Right. That's like, yeah, that's not going to go well.
Especially if you do it that way. And I've made that mistake early in my career where you're just like, no, I can't. And you're like, well, that probably wasn't the best way to handle that situation.
Right. So instead, if it's no, because here is my list of things, here's all my to-dos that I have right now that I have to do. And so where does this fit? Because some of these things might slip. So that it's basically instead of saying no, it's saying yes, and help me understand where this fits.
Yeah, where this fits in the mix.
Because things are going to drop. And what's not negotiable is your date night and your me time and your outside of work things, like that. You kind of have to stand up for those. So you don't say no, you say yes. And here's the list of all the things I have to do. So I can take that on if you tell me which of these things I can drop off.
It's less important. Which of these things that I already have on my priorities is less important than what you're asking from me right now.
And if this is a big, oftentimes you're going to know whether this is just on a whim, like, hey, can you do this? Or if this is like actually something that's really important to the boss or the organization or that kind of thing. And so the other thing that's really helpful is using a story when you're saying no, as to explain why. If you're trying to explain why, use a story. And so it's a story about your kid has this thing coming up and he's been practicing for months to be the lead in the play or something at work. And so I have to take him to practice, and I got family obligations in the evening because he's been working for months on this. That sounds different than, no, I'm not free
I'm too
on
busy.
I'm too busy on Thursday night. I can't. So if you say why with a story,
Contextualizing it.
that's really helpful in
Okay.
those situations.
Okay. I love that. Something I'd add to it that I
Yeah.
think I've seen over the years a lot is a lot of times there's this temptation to immediately respond with a yes or a no before you actually really even understand what's being asked of you. It's like, hey, can
Nice.
you do this? And it's
Yeah.
like, yes or no. Instead of the number of times I've been like, help me understand what it is you're really asking before I do and what you, I have been blown away in my career how much that has transformed my ability to navigate things because so often we just have these reactions to things and we don't really even understand what we're reacting. Hey, can you do this? And
Yeah.
I, in my head, have placed, well, I think it's this and I think it's all these other things and da 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 da. And so the reaction can be no, but then you're like, well, help me understand what it is you're thinking. Oh,
Yeah.
you just want me to do this like 30-second, that's it? Oh, I was completely misunderstood. And again, the communication gaps, I
Oh,
cannot tell you how many times. And again, people feel like you're actually taking the time to listen. So going back to the relationship building, instead of somebody feeling like you're either just a yes person or you're always the really difficult person who's always saying no, it's like, well, I'd like to let me understand what you actually are looking for. And honestly, I feel like 99 times out of 100, it is never what I actually thought when I had my initial reaction.
man, Christopher, I love that you mentioned this because there's two magic, hacks and strategies, right? Here's one, three magic words. Tell me more. When they
I
come
love
to
that.
you and they're like, "Oh, can you do this thing?" "Oh, tell me more about that." Before you respond, it's like you said, the pause, right? Ask them to tell you more. And I use this every time I have an emotional response to something. Because you get really pissed off about something or you're upset or you're something. And before you catch yourself, I always,
I'm
I've even
still
said it
working on
through
that, by the
I've
way.
said it through gritted teeth sometimes. I've been like, tell me more about that. Let me like breathe while you give me more information because you don't have enough information to go off based on the offhanded thing that they said. So the first one is tell me more. Those three words, man, awesome.